She only applied to be his son's nanny until a photo in the mansion revealed a past she swore to bury. Now, with a mute child whispering her name and a dead woman's journal in her hands, Lucia must decide: tell the truth or risk losing the family she was never meant to find. Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart. Hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. Lucia stood at the massive wrought iron gate, her fingers trembling slightly as she pressed the intercom button. The Carrington estate was even more imposing than it looked in the photographs. Sprawling gardens, towering stone archways, and ivy-covered walls that whispered of old money and untold secrets. She adjusted her second-hand cardigan and took a deep breath. This wasn't just any job interview, it was her last shot at stability. The gate buzzed, and she stepped through. A butler led her across the polished marble floors to a sunlit atrium. There, seated with a stern posture and a tablet in hand, was Nathaniel Carrington. Tall, sharp-jawed, dressed in tailored gray, he was every bit the billionaire the tabloids painted him to be. Widowed, emotionally distant, fiercely private. His fortune came from tech, but his legacy was his son, 6-year-old Ethan, who hadn't spoken a word since his mother's death. Lucia curtsied instinctively, a habit from years of service. "Good afternoon, Mr. Carrington." His eyes flicked up, assessing. "Miss Lucia Marin?" She nodded. "You have extensive experience," he noted, paroling, "but no references from the last 2 years?" "Had to leave the city. Family matters," she answered gently. "But I've worked with children most of my life." Before he could probe further, a soft shuffling interrupted them. Ethan peeked from behind a doorway, chestnut curls, downcast eyes, tiny fingers clutching a stuffed dog. Lucia's heart softened. She crouched. "Hi there." No answer. Ethan blinked, wary. She slowly reached into her bag and pulled out a tiny origami swan. "Want to see something magical?" She unfolded and refolded it in seconds, first a bird, then a rabbit, then a flower. The boy's eyes widened. He stepped closer. Lucia smiled. "This one's for you." She placed the swan in his palm. Ethan didn't speak, but he nodded once and sat beside her. Nathaniel observed the moment in silence. Then, with a small breath, he put down his tablet. "You're hired." Lucian blinked. "Just like that?" He nodded. "Ethan hasn't voluntarily approached anyone in over a year." Lucia's voice lowered. "Then maybe he just needed someone who wasn't afraid of silence." That night, she was shown to her quarters in the East Wing, a cozy guest room overlooking the garden. The estate was quiet after dusk, almost too quiet. Lucia couldn't sleep. Something about the house tugged at her. It was a feeling in the bones, an echo she couldn't explain. The next morning, she accompanied Ethan to the garden while the butler tended the roses. The boy held her hand, refusing to leave her side. While chasing a butterfly, he tugged her toward a glass-walled corridor that led to Nathaniel's private study. We shouldn't." But the door was open. Inside, sunlight spilled over shelves of books and minimalist decor. A single painting hung above the fireplace. And there it was. Lucia froze. The photo on the shelf beneath the painting. It wasn't the woman's beauty that shook her, it was her eyes. Lucy stepped forward slowly, her breath hitched. The woman in the photograph had Lucia's eyes, her exact shade of hazel flecked with gold. Lucia stumbled back, gripping the desk to steady herself. Her chest ached, her vision blurred. "What is this?" Footsteps. She turned, and there stood Nathaniel. He glanced at the photo, then at Lucia. "You've seen her before, haven't you?" he said quietly. Lucia's lips parted, but no sound came. Because she had seen that woman before. In a dream. In flashes of fire. In memories she had never dared to question. Lucia's hand trembled as she placed the photo frame back on the shelf, careful not to let it slip through her fingers. "I didn't mean to intrude," she whispered, her voice catching in her throat. Nathaniel stepped further into the room, his expression unreadable. You didn't answer my question. Do you recognize her? Lucia hesitated. How could she explain it? The way her body had reacted as if struck by lightning, the moment she laid eyes on that face. Not out of fear, not recognition in the usual sense, but a deep, aching familiarity, like waking from a dream that never quite left you. I don't know her, she said slowly, but I've seen her. Nathaniel's gaze sharpened. Where? Lucia looked down. I've had dreams, since I was a girl, of a woman with those eyes, and a boy, always quiet, always sad. I thought it was just my mind playing tricks, but now… She gestured helplessly toward the frame. I don't know what's real anymore. Nathaniel's jaw clenched. Her name was Celeste, my wife. Lucia looked up sharply. Was? She passed away 3 years ago, he said, turning toward the large window that overlooked the garden. Car accident. Ethan was in the back seat. He survived. She didn't. Silence thickened between them. Lucia stepped closer to the photo again. She was beautiful. She was more than that, Nathaniel replied. She was light. And Ethan, he hasn't spoken since we lost her. Lucia glanced at the child playing quietly outside, still holding the origami swan she had made. Seems to like you, Hoscombe added, almost reluctantly. Lucia took a slow breath. Maybe he sees something in me that I can't explain. 'Cause I feel it too. This house, him, her face. It's like I've stepped into a story I forgot I belonged to. Nathaniel studied her carefully. You're not from this area, are you? She shook her head. No, I grew up in foster homes, bounced around a lot, never knew my birth parents. That, apparently, struck a nerve. Nathaniel's expression shifted slightly, but he turned back toward the desk and tapped the frame twice before facing her again. I've interviewed dozens of nannies. None lasted longer than a week. Lucia's eyes narrowed. Why? Because they treated my son like a burden, he said flatly. Or worse, a paycheck. Lucia's voice was gentle. He's neither. Nathaniel didn't respond for a moment. Then he said, You'll stay on, for now, but stay away from this room unless you're invited. Lucia nodded, even as questions swirled violently in her mind. She returned to her quarters that evening with Ethan clinging softly to her hand. The boy refused to let go until she sat beside him for bedtime. She read him a story. He didn't speak, but he touched her wrist gently before falling asleep. Later, in the quiet of her own room, Lucia sat on the bed and stared out the window toward the wing where the photograph lay waiting. Celeste Carrington. Why did her eyes look like hers? Why had the boy gravitated toward her so quickly? Why did this mansion, this life of marble and grief, feel less like someone else's story and more like a chapter torn from her own? She dug through her old bag, searching for a piece of herself. At the bottom, wrapped in silk, was a small silver necklace she'd had for as long as she could remember. No inscription, no markings, but something about it had always whispered of a past untold. She held it tightly in her fist. Tomorrow, she would start her duties officially. She'd smile. She'd care for Ethan. She'd obey Nathaniel's rules. But deep inside, Lucia knew she couldn't walk away from this mystery. Because maybe, just maybe, she hadn't come to the Carrington estate by chance. And whatever secrets lingered in those halls, they were tied to her blood, and she intended to find out how. The late afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of the Carrington estate, casting warm shadows across the marble floors. Nathaniel stood in the hallway, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Lucia as she sat at the edge of the velvet couch, still shaken. You froze back there, he said, voice low. That wasn't just surprise. You looked like you'd seen a ghost. Lucia looked down, her hands folded tightly in her lap. I'm sorry, Mr. Carrington. The photo, it reminded me of someone I once knew. He stepped closer, gaze sharp. Who? She swallowed, reaching for a thread of truth that wouldn't unravel everything. Years ago, I worked with someone who used to serve your family, a housekeeper named Maris. I was very close to her, and to someone else she brought around once or twice. Nathaniel's eyes didn't move. My wife? Lucia hesitated, then nodded. Isabella. He inhaled slowly, the name still a wound. She was kind to me, Lucia continued. I was just a girl then, helping out at the shelter. She visited with donations, books, warm meals, always. But meals, always. Always. No voting. Never needing credit. Nathaniel's gaze softened, but he didn't speak. He simply nodded once and stepped back, as if unsure how much more he wanted to remember. Later that evening, the house felt quieter than usual. Ethan was in the garden with Lucia, a small notebook in hand as he drew shapes in the fading light. His silence was no longer heavy, it had taken on something gentler, more curious. Lucia knelt beside him, pointing gently at a crooked sunflower he'd scrawled in red crayon. That one's my favorite. It looks like it's dancing. Ethan didn't respond, but his hand paused mid-sketch. He looked up at her, eyes wide. She smiled. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to. I'm glad you're here. His lower lip trembled, then steadied. He reached into the grass and picked a tiny daisy, holding it out. Lucia's heart nearly broke at the gesture. Thank you, sweetheart. And then, in the smallest whisper, barely audible over the breeze, came one word. Ugh. Lucia froze. She blinked, unsure she'd heard it right. But Ethan's eyes didn't waver. His lips had formed the word with both fear and longing, like it had waited 2 years to surface. Lucia gently pulled him into her arms. You're safe, she whispered. Her safe, little one. Inside the house, Nathaniel had been watching through the glass doors. He hadn't expected anything, not today. He only wanted to check on Ethan. But when he saw the boys speak, for the first time in 2 years, something inside him cracked. He pressed his palm flat against the glass, breath-catching. He didn't interrupt. Later that night, Lucia stood in her room, staring at an old keepsake box she hadn't opened in years. She'd brought it out of instinct after the photo earlier, an ache she couldn't shake. She lifted the lid and pulled out a folded envelope, the edges frayed, the ink faded. The handwriting on the front stopped her cold. Lucia, if life ever pulls you back here. She recognized it instantly. Isabella's script, flowing, graceful, written in ink that had once danced beneath the woman's fingertips. Lucia sat down slowly, the letter trembling in her hands. She hadn't even known it had been there, hidden between old pages of poetry and pressed flowers. She didn't remember packing it. Had someone slipped it in before she left? With a shaky breath, she opened the letter and began to read. And as the first lines unraveled before her eyes, everything changed. My dearest Lucia, if you are reading this, it means something has gone terribly wrong. Lucia's fingers trembled as she read the opening line again, barely breathing. The page carried Isabella's scent, lavender and something faintly like rain. I have trusted very few people in my life, but you always saw more than what I allowed the world to see. That's why I'm writing to you now, while I still have the chance. The words blurred for a moment before she blinked them back into focus. I believe someone is watching me, someone inside this house. Lucia sat straighter, her skin crawling. There are things I've uncovered about the estate, the foundation, and Nathaniel's father's business dealings that I'm not supposed to know. If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident. Lucia covered her mouth, stunned. Nathaniel had spoken so little of Isabella's death. The official story had been an aneurysm, unsudden, tragic, unexplained. But this letter whispered something far darker. She read on. If Ethan grows up afraid, if he stops speaking, it's because he's trying to protect something. Or someone. Please, if I'm gone, find a way to reach him. And if you can, forgive Nathaniel. He never knew. The letter ended with a simple closing. With love, always, Isabella. Lucian folded the paper carefully, placing it back into the envelope with trembling hands. Her chest ached, a storm rising in her. There had always been questions, but now there were suspicions she couldn't ignore. The accident, the way the staff walked on eggshells, the distant way Nathaniel seemed to grieve, like he wasn't just mourning, but questioning everything too. Lucia sat in silence for a long time, until the hallway creaked. She tucked the letter under a drawer, just as soft footsteps approached. Nathaniel stood at the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You were quiet at dinner. Everything all right?" Lucia nodded. "Just a lot on my mind." He stepped inside, eyes scanning the room, not intrusively, but cautiously. "Ethan's been asking for you." Lucia blinked. "He spoke again?" Nathaniel shook his head, not with words, but he pointed to your room, then to the garden. There was wonder in his voice, and something else, something that made Lucia ache. "He never did that," Nathaniel continued. "Not even when Isabella was here. It was like he couldn't find his voice." Lucia's chest tightened. Sometimes silence isn't fear. Sometimes it's waiting for the right person to listen. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. "You're not just a nanny, are you?" Lucia looked away. "Maybe I was never meant to be just one." Before he could ask more, Ethan appeared at the door, holding a crumpled paper in his small hands. He walked toward Lucia and opened it. A sketch. 3 stick figures, one taller male, one smaller child, and one in a dress, holding both their hands. Lucia swallowed. "Is this us?" Ethan nodded, his eyes sparkled with hope. Nathaniel crouched beside them, and for a moment there were no titles, no walls, just a father, a child, and a woman clinging to the last words of a ghost. And in that silence, something unspoken was born. But across the mansion, in the shadows of a locked study, a camera blinked red once, then faded to black. Lucia hadn't meant to snoop. She had only been tidying up Ethan's playroom while he napped on the window bench, his soft breathing barely audible above the afternoon breeze rustling through the trees. It was a leather-bound notebook, its spine faded, wedged behind a stack of children's storybooks. The initials on the cover, Irene's favorite, 3 and a 5, crisp handwriting bloomed across the pages in looping ink strokes. Familiar. Intimate. Isabella Carrington. Lucia's breath caught. She sank into the carpet, journal in hand, and began to read. March 7th. Something's wrong. I know it sounds paranoid, but I feel watched. Nathaniel dismisses it as stress. Mr. Kelly wrote a bunch of words on a paper. I'm not imagining the small things. My keys not where I left them, Ethan's room door slightly open in the night, that cold shiver whenever I pass the west corridor. Lucia flipped the page, her pulse quickening. Isabella's voice seemed to echo through time, her words steeped in anxiety and loneliness. March 19th. He says I'm unraveling. Maybe I am, but someone's trying to silence me. I overheard a phone call yesterday. He said, "She won't be a problem much longer." I couldn't see who it was. Lucia pressed the page to her chest, her heart pounding like a war drum. Nathaniel's footsteps creaked faintly down the hallway. She shut the journal quickly, sliding it beneath Ethan's toy chest just before he appeared in the doorway. "You are," Nathaniel said, voice gentle. "I was wondering where you'd gone off to." Lucia stood, brushing dust from her hands, just putting away some books. He nodded. "Ethan's still asleep?" She nodded, and he walked in, his eyes resting briefly on the boy curled in the window light. "Lucia," he said suddenly, his tone shifting, "I've been meaning to talk to you." She turned, suddenly alert. "I'd like to offer you something more permanent," he said. "A live-in position, full-time." Lucia blinked. "You mean, move in?" He nodded. "Ethan has responded to you in ways he hasn't with anyone, not even his therapists. He said, 'Mama,' because of you." Lucia's throat tightened. That moment still lingered in her memory. Ethan reaching for her, his lips parting to whisper the word that hadn't left his mouth in 2 years. Her name hadn't been Mama, but in that moment, he'd felt safe enough to speak. That mattered. Nathaniel continued, "It's more than just caretaking. It's a presence, Lucia. You've become part of this house, and maybe—" He paused, his eyes searching hers. "You already were, long before this." The words sent a chill down her spine. Did he know? Lucia looked away. I need to think about it. Of course, he said quickly. No pressure, just consider it. He stepped back, giving her space, and quietly left the room. As soon as he was gone, Lucia dropped to her knees and pulled the journal from under the toy chest. She turned the pages faster now, scanning for more. And then, almost wedged between two entries, she found it. A folded page, yellowed at the crease, tucked away as if hidden. She unfolded it carefully. A name, a date, and one line underlined twice. He knows I found out, and he's Nathaniel's brother. Lucia stared at the name, her entire body freezing. Suddenly, the silence of the house felt heavier, the shadows longer. She clutched the page, realizing that everything Isabella feared, everything she suspected, had been closer than anyone had dared imagine. And now, Lucia was living under that same roof. Lucia folded the journal page with trembling hands and slipped it back between the other entries. The name haunted her. Marcus Carrington. Nathaniel's younger brother. The one she had only met once, years ago. The one who was away on business when Isabella's death made the news. The one who had always smiled a little too wide when Isabella walked into her room. She remembered it now. Isabella grew quiet after those dinners. How her light dimmed just slightly, like a candle shielding itself from wind. Lucia stood slowly, a chill crawling across her skin despite the warmth of the afternoon sun. She felt the heavy eyes of ghosts and secrets in the walls. Ethan stirred on the bench, whimpering softly. Lucia rushed to him, her instinct overtaking fear. She gently cupped his face, whispering soothing words until his eyelids fluttered closed again. He needed her. That alone steadied her heart. That evening, she stepped out onto the back terrace, drawn by the sound of string music playing from Nathaniel's study. Through the glass doors, she saw him seated at the piano, pink fingers gliding gently over the keys, eyes lost in thought. He looked vulnerable. Lucia hesitated, then knocked. He glanced up and smiled faintly, nodding for her to enter. "I didn't know you played," she said. "I don't," he replied with a dry chuckle. "Not well, anyway." "Isabella was the musician?" Lucia nodded slowly. "She taught me when we were girls." Nathaniel's head turned sharply. "Taught you?" The moment hung in the air like a held breath. Olivia caught herself. "She taught a lot of us at the youth center." His eyes softened, but they searched her still. "You speak of her like you knew her well." Lucia didn't answer. She stepped closer to the piano instead. "You once asked me to consider staying," she said. "I've made my decision." Nathaniel stood, hope flickering in his expression. "You'll stay?" She nodded, voice steady. "For Ethan, and for Isabella." He blinked. "For Isabella?" Lucia's throat closed. She turned away. "You said yourself, there's something about me that feels familiar." Nathaniel didn't argue, he simply nodded. "Then stay," he said. "We'll figure the rest out as we go." The words warmed her in a strange way. But they were dangerous too. The truth rested too close to the surface now. Later that night, Lucia returned to her room and retrieved the journal once more. She read until her eyes burned. The final entry stopped her cold. "If anything happens to me, check the greenhouse. That's where I hid the last piece, proof of who was behind it all." Lucia clutched the journal to her chest. She had to go. The next morning, just after sunrise, Lucia slipped out to the estate's overgrown greenhouse, tucked behind a wall of ivy. The door creaked as she entered, the air thick with dust and forgotten vines. She followed the path Isabella had once described in letters, stepping over cracked tiles and forgotten planters. Her eyes scanned the walls until she found it, an old storage box, wedged between broken tools and a tattered gardening hat. Inside was a velvet pouch, and within it, a flash drive. Lucia stared. She turned to leave him, rose. Marcus Carrington stood in the doorway. "Well," he said, smiling coolly, "you've been busy, haven't you?" Lucian backed up a step, the pouch clutched in her fist. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I think you do, he replied. That's my brother's problem. He never sees what's right in front of him. Lucia didn't speak. Her mind raced. Marcus tilted his head, eyes glinting with menace. I suggest you be careful, Lucia. Secrets buried are often better left untouched. He walked away before she could answer. But she wouldn't be scared off. Not this time. She had Isabella's words. She had the truth. And she wasn't letting go. The late afternoon sun poured golden light across the rose garden, casting long shadows that danced across the cobblestones. Lucia sat quietly on a wrought iron bench, hands folded in her lap, watching Ethan chase butterflies with a soft laugh that sounded like spring itself. His voice, once silent, now echoed faintly among the flowers. Nathaniel stood a few steps behind her, watching them both. This was her favorite place, he said softly, his voice roughened by memories. Isabella painted here every morning, said the roses helped her breathe. Lucia turned to him, her eyes misted with a kind of empathy that couldn't be taught. It feels like she's still here. Nathaniel nodded, then slowly walked toward her. When you're here, the silence doesn't feel so heavy. Lucia looked down, flustered. I never meant to intrude. You didn't. His reply was gentle, almost reverent. You've brought something back that I thought we lost forever. Lucia blinked rapidly and changed the subject. Ethan's drawings, have you seen them lately? Nathaniel furrowed his brows. Just the usual scribbles. Why? She pulled a folded page from her apron. It was one of Ethan's latest sketches. Stick figures in a garden, a woman with long hair labeled Lulu, and beside her a tall, dark figure standing in the background. His eyes were shaded in. She calls it the Shadow Man, she said quietly. He's drawn this figure in almost every picture for the past 2 weeks. Nathaniel took the paper and studied it. Do you think it's just imagination? I'm not sure, Lucia admitted. But when I asked him who it was, he looked scared. He whispered, he was there. The air seemed to grow colder, though the sun hadn't dimmed. Nathaniel poked the paper. We should be careful. Ethan's mind, it holds more than we know. Lucia glanced toward the house, where dinner was being prepared. Maybe you should talk to him. I will, Nathaniel promised. But before he could say more, the sound of tires crunching on gravel interrupted them. A sleek black car pulled into the estate's circular driveway. A tall man stepped out, dressed in a designer suit, his presence commanding and arrogant all at once. Lucia froze. Nathaniel sighed. Victor Carrington. Nathaniel's estranged younger brother strode across the lawn like he owned it. Well, well. Look who still plays house in the rose garden. Lucia's breath hitched. That voice. Smooth, confident, chilling. It wasn't just familiarity, it was recognition. Her heart pounded as her ears rang with a memory she had buried for years. That night, the storm, the screaming, Isabella's last breath. She hadn't seen the man's face then, just his silhouette in the hallway, his voice slicing through the dark like a knife. His voice. Lucia quickly turned away, trying to collect herself. Nathaniel, oblivious to her inner panic, stood up. Victor, what are you doing here? I'm sorry, he asked. Just thought I'd check in. You've been dodging my calls. Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. And I heard you've taken in a new nanny. Rather charming, isn't she? Lucia stepped back, her fingers trembling behind her back. Victor extended a hand toward her. I don't believe we've met. Lucia stared at his outstretched palm but didn't move. Her silence was louder than any reply. Nathaniel cleared his throat, stepping in. This is Lucia. She's here to help Ethan. Victor's gaze lingered on her. Interesting name. Lucia. Lucia forced a tight smile, nodding once, but inside, her world was spinning. It was him. She didn't know how or why, but she was sure. She had heard that voice the night Isabella died. And now, that voice was sitting at their dinner table. Lucia excused herself the moment dinner ended, her nerves stretched thin like worn lace. She hurried down the hallway to the guest room she had been using, shutting the door quietly behind her and leaning against it. Her breaths came in shallow waves. The room was dim, but her thoughts raced brighter than ever. She could still hear Victor's voice in her mind, smooth, polite, and utterly dangerous. That was the voice she had heard whispering in the shadows 2 years ago, when Isabella had died. That night had haunted her since. She never spoke of it. Who would believe her? A servant's friend who just happened to be there, hidden by fear? And now, that same voice had returned, smiling across the table, sipping wine in the same house where so much had been lost. Lucia sat on the edge of the bed and opened the journal again. Isabella's words stared back at her. "I don't trust Victor. He's too interested in the finances. I've seen him talking to my lawyer behind Nathaniel's back. If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident." Lucia shivered. It wasn't paranoia. Isabella had feared for her life, and no one had listened. A soft knock at the door startled her. "Lucia?" Nathaniel's voice, calm, concerned. She stood and opened it halfway. "I just wanted to check in," he said. "Victor left? He's always been difficult." Lucia nodded, unsure what to say. "You looked pale tonight," he added gently. "Did he say something?" Lucia hesitated, then shook her head. "No, just tired." He studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. "Ethan asked for you. He couldn't sleep." Lucia's heart softened. "I'll go to him." She found Ethan curled up in bed, clutching his stuffed elephant. His eyes were wide, his thumb in his mouth. "Lulu," he whispered, "don't let the shadow man come." Lucia's chest ached. She sat beside him, brushing his hair from his forehead. "You're safe. I'm right here." He pulled something from under his pillow, a new drawing. It was of the rose garden again, but this time the shadow man was closer, taller, with red scribbles around his eyes. Lucia gently took the drawing and folded it. "Did you see him today?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Was it Victor?" The boy blinked, then nodded again, once firmly. Lucia's fingers tightened on the page, her breath caught. Ethan remembered. He saw it too. That voice, that presence. Victor had been there that night. She stayed with Ethan until his breathing evened into sleep. Then she tiptoed back to her room and pulled out a small velvet pouch from the bottom of her travel bag. Inside was an old keepsake, Isabella's necklace, the one she'd left behind in Lucia's hands 2 years ago. And with it, an unopened envelope. Lucia had been too afraid to read it before, but now she peeled it open with trembling hands. "Dearest Lucia, if you're reading this, it means something has gone terribly wrong. I've always trusted you, more than anyone. If anything ever happens to me, please take care of Ethan. Keep him away from Victor. He's not who he seems. I'm leaving this for you, just in case I don't get to say goodbye. With all my heart, Isabella." Tears fell silently onto the paper. Lucius clutched it to her chest and looked out the window into the night. She had been too late to save Isabella. But she would not be too late to protect her son. Or uncover the truth. Lucia didn't know how yet, but the shadows were rising again. And this time, she was ready to stand in their way. The hallway was quiet, cloaked in the soft hush of midnight. Lucy moved carefully, her steps barely audible on the polished marble floors. She had seen Victor slip away from the dining room earlier, whispering hurriedly into his phone before heading toward the west wing. Something in her gut told her to follow. She turned the corner just in time to hear a voice, low and rough, coming from the open veranda. Peeking from behind the curtains, she watched as Victor stood beneath the moonlight, phone pressed to his ear. "No, she doesn't suspect a thing," he said, voice tense. "But the nanny's getting too close. We may need to move sooner than planned." Lucia froze. Her blood ran cold. He wasn't talking about some vague business move. He was talking about her. She backed away slowly, heart pounding, then retreated into the corridor. She didn't see the shadow shift behind her. In the safety of her small attic room, she locked the door and curled up on the edge of the bed. Morning came too slowly. Later, she found herself in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she poured tea. Mrs. Calloway, the Carrington housekeeper, noticed. "You all right, dear?" the older woman asked gently. Lucia hesitated, then nodded. "I think I overheard something I shouldn't have." Mrs. Calloway's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. She put down the tea towel and sat across from Lucia. "Let me guess," she murmured, voice barely above a whisper. "Victor." Lucia's breath caught in her throat. "You knew?" "I knew that man was no good the moment he stepped into this house. Too smooth, too calculated." She paused. "You're not the first woman he's tried to corner, Lucia. Be careful." That warning lodged deep into Lucia's chest. That night, as the wind howled beyond the windows, Lucia crept down the back staircase. She didn't want to stay idle, not anymore. She had to know what Victor was planning, and if he truly had anything to do with Isabella's death. Halfway down the stairs, she froze. Victor stood at the foot of the staircase, eyes gleaming like a predator. "You really don't know how to mind your own business, do you?" he said smoothly. Lucia's throat went dry. "I'm not afraid of you." Victor laughed. "You should be." He stepped closer, but just as she braced herself, a soft voice rang out. It was Ethan, barefoot, holding his favorite stuffed bear, eyes wide with confusion and fear. Victor stepped back. The moment passed. Lucia rushed to Ethan, scooped him up, and carried him upstairs. Later that night, she sat beside his bed, brushing a hand through his hair as he drifted off. But just as she began to rise, Ethan cried out, high and piercing. Lucia turned. He was thrashing in his sleep, small scroaked at face soaked in sweat. "No, no, don't go in there," he whimpered, barely coherent. "It's fire, Mama, fire." Lucia held him, whispered calming words. His breathing slowed. When she finally tucked him back in and turned on the nightlight, something caught her eye. His drawings. The floor was scattered with pages, dozens of crayon sketches. Every single one showed the same thing. A large room, filled with smoke, fire on the walls, and a figure standing in the flames. She dropped to her knees, heartbreaking as she held up the final drawing. It wasn't just any room. It was Isabella's old art studio, the place where she died. Lucia stared at the final drawing, her hands trembling. The flames were scribbled in bold red strokes, chaotic and urgent, and at the center was a shadowed figure standing at the door, watching, not helping, not running, just watching. She turned to Ethan, who had fallen back into a fitful sleep. "Did you see this?" she whispered. "Were you there?" She carefully gathered the drawings and took them to her room. Sitting at her small desk, she arranged them in order. The images told a silent story, one that words never captured, and at the bottom corner of one sketch, Ethan had scrawled two shaky letters, V and C. To Carrington. She didn't sleep that night. Morning light crept through the curtains as she made her way to Mrs. Calloway's quarters. The housekeeper opened the door, surprised to see her so early. "He knows," Lucia said quietly. "Ethan saw something, maybe everything." Mrs. Calloway's expression hardened. "Then we need to protect that boy." Lucia nodded. "I'll talk to Nathaniel. He needs to know." But just as she turned the hallway corner, she stopped short. Victor was standing at the bottom of the staircase again, this time with a drink in hand and a chilling smile on his face. "Going somewhere?" he asked. Lucia squared her shoulders. "To speak to your brother." Victor took a step closer. "You think he'll believe you? A nanny with no credentials and a history you haven't even told him about?" Lucia flinched. "Tell him, and I promise you'll be the one escorted out. Not me." She didn't answer. She just walked away. Nathaniel was in the conservatory, reading the paper with a distracted expression. He looked up when she entered. "Lucia, I need to talk to you," she said, unsteady. "It's about your brother and Isabella." He frowned, folding the paper. "What about them?" Lucia hesitated. I think Ethan saw something about the fire. He's been drawing pictures, and they all show the same room, the same fire, and someone standing there, watching, not helping. Nathaniel's face paled. He said mama, fire in his sleep. He never talks, but he said that. Nathaniel stood. You think Victor was there? Lucia nodded slowly. And I think he's been trying to scare me into silence? Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I was scared you'd think I was just a nanny with stories. He walked toward her. Lucia, since the day you came here, you've done nothing but protect my son. I trust you. She breathed in relief. Later that day, while Nathaniel made a call to his legal team, Lucia returned to Ethan's room. He was playing quietly with blocks, his drawings now neatly stacked on the desk. She sat beside him. Hey, buddy, can I ask you something? Ethan didn't look up. The man in your pictures? The one in the fire? Was that Uncle Victor? Ethan paused, then slowly nodded. Lucia's heart clasped. Thank you for telling me, sweetheart. That night, Nathaniel confronted Victor behind closed doors. No shouting, just cold fury in his voice as he demanded Victor leave the house. Lucia watched from the upstairs landing, arms wrapped around Ethan. The house felt heavy with secrets, but something had shifted. The truth was no longer buried in silence. It was starting to rise. And with it, a storm neither of them could yet see coming. Lucia sat in the quiet of the library, heart pounding, fingers brushing the worn edges of Isabella's journal. The firelight flickered low, casting shadows on the walls, and for a moment, she almost felt Isabella's presence in the room. Her voice trembled as she looked across at Nathaniel. I need to tell you something, she said softly. He glanced up from his paperwork, brow furrowed in concern. Lucia, what is it? She clutched the journal to her chest. Isabella didn't die in a simple accident. She was scared. In her last entries, she wrote about someone watching her. She thought someone wanted her gone. Nathaniel sat back, visibly shaken. What are you saying? She firmly says. There was silence, then a laugh, hollow, disbelieving. My brother? Lucia, you're exhausted. You've taken on so much with Ethan. She wrote it, Nathaniel, Lucia interrupted, her voice cracking. In her own handwriting. I found her journal hidden behind the false panel in Ethan's toy chest. She mentioned a man with a scar behind his ear. She said she was going to confront him. And then she died. Nathaniel stood, pacing. That's a serious accusation. Victor and I, yes, we've had differences. But he would never. Lucia swallowed. The night she died, I heard a voice, someone arguing with her. I couldn't see his face, but I heard the voice again recently. At dinner, when Victor laughed, I knew it was him. Nathaniel stopped pacing. You're saying you recognized Victor's voice from the night Isabella died? Lucia nodded. And I'm not the only one who suspects something. Mrs. Ellison, she's kept things quiet for years. Just then, as if summoned, the housekeeper stepped into the room, her face grim and hands shaking slightly. I think it's time, Mrs. Ellison said quietly, approaching them with a thick manila envelope in hand. I didn't know who to trust back then, but I kept this. She handed it to Nathaniel. Inside was a fire report, dated the week Isabella died. Nathaniel opened it, his hands growing rigid as he scanned the first page. His face paled. Says the fire started from the outside, not from her art supplies. Mrs. Ellison nodded slowly. I found a broken kerosene lamp behind the rose hedge the next morning. Someone threw it through the studio's rear window. Lucia stepped closer. Why didn't you say anything? I tried, but the original report was altered. I was told to keep quiet or I'd lose my pension. I didn't want to believe it was Victor. But Isabella was like a daughter to me. Nathaniel sank into the nearest chair, rubbing his temple as the realization set in. He had access. He had motive. Isabella changed her will a month before the fire. She left everything to Ethan. Lucas lowered her voice. Victor would be cut out if Isabella died before the change was filed. Inherit everything, Nathaniel whispered. Of course. He had every reason. The room felt colder now, the truth unfurling between them like smoke. A knock startled them all. One of the house staff stepped in, eyes wide. "Sir, you have a visitor? It's Mr. Victor. He's brought his lawyer." Lucia and Mrs. Ellison exchanged a look. Nathaniel stood slowly. "What now?" The staff member hesitated. "They're here to file a complaint against Miss Lucia, accusing her of emotional manipulation and theft." Lucia's breath caught. Mrs. Ellison stepped forward. "That's ridiculous. She's done nothing wrong." Nathaniel turned to Lucia, voice tight. "Don't worry, we're going to fight this, together." But as he walked out to face his brother, Lucia's hands shook, not with fear, but with the weight of truth she could no longer keep buried. Victor stood in the grand foyer, arms crossed, a smirk barely hidden beneath his perfectly tailored suit. Beside him was a cold-eyed attorney clutching a thick leather briefcase. Nathaniel descended the stairs with deliberate calm, but Lucia could see the tension in his clutched jaw as she watched from the edge of the hall. "I wasn't expecting you," Nathaniel said dryly. "I'm sure you weren't," Victor replied, voice smooth and condescending. "But some matters require swift action. Your nanny, it seems, has taken liberties far beyond her station." Lucia stepped forward before Nathaniel could respond. "I've taken nothing that wasn't already lost, and I've done nothing but protect something your family should have done long ago." Victor tilted his head, passionate and dangerous. "She's manipulated a grieving child, inserted herself into a vulnerable household, and now claims my late sister-in-law was murdered. That's more than reckless, it's criminal." "She found the fire report," Nathaniel cut in. "It was real, suppressed, and Isabella wrote about you, in her own words." Victor's smirk faltered, but only slightly. Anyone could have written those pages. Desperate people do desperate things. Mrs. Ellison stepped from the shadows. "And desperate men do cruel things. I saw you the night before the fire. You came to the studio, angry, shouting. Isabella was crying." Victor turned, face suddenly red. "You have no proof," she said, calm and unwavering. "But I have memory, and I'm not afraid anymore." Victor's attorney opened the briefcase. "We're here to present official complaints. Miss Lucia is being accused of defamation, emotional coercion of a minor, and suspected theft of property belonging to the Carrington estate." Lucia's breath caught. "This is an attack." "It's a distraction," Nathaniel said, "because the truth is finally catching up to you." Victor straightened. "You're going to choose her word over mine." "I'm choosing the evidence, the truth, and the woman who brought light back into Ethan's life after 2 years of silence." The attorney placed a thick folder on the console table. "These are the formal accusations. You'll be receiving a summons within the next 72 hours. As they turned to leave, Lucia whispered, "We're not afraid of you." Victor paused, eyes dark. "You should be." After they left, silence flooded the foyer. Lucia turned to Nathaniel. "What happens now?" "We prepare. If he's taking us to court, we'll fight back with everything we have." "But Lucia?" He stepped closer, his voice quieter, more urgent. "Are you ready for this? You'll be dragged through the mud. They'll come after your past." She nodded. "Then let them, because I won't let him rewrite Isabella's death as a footnote." He searched her face. "Why did you come here, Lucia? Really?" Her voice shook. "Because she sent me a letter weeks before the fire. She told me something was wrong and asked me to come, but it arrived too late, and I've lived with that guilt every day." Nathaniel's gaze softened. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore." Upstairs, Ethan peeked out from the banister, watching the adults below. In his small hands, he clutched another drawing. This one of 3 figures standing in front of a house, one with a red heart drawn on the chest. Lucia looked up at him and smiled, tears in her eyes. Behind her, Mrs. Ellison whispered, "We'll have to bring the truth to court. All of it." Lucia nodded. "Then let's make sure Isabella's voice is finally heard. The fire may have silenced her once, but now That silence was burning away, slowly, steadily, by the strength of those still standing in the ashes. The courthouse was colder than Lucia expected, its marble floors echoing with the hush of tension. She sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Across from her, Victor Carrington lounged in his chair with smug detachment, his high-profile attorney whispering confidently in his ear. Nathaniel sat just a few seats away, unreadable, but his eyes flickered toward her more than once. She didn't know what that meant anymore. The judge entered, and the trial began. Victor's lawyer painted Lucia as a manipulative outsider, a stranger who wormed her way into a grieving family's trust to steal from the estate and influence a vulnerable child. They cited journal entries taken out of context and the complaint Victor had filed, claiming Lucia had emotionally destabilized Ethan and may have contributed to the boy's regression. Lucia's stomach twisted, but she kept her chin up. She had nothing to hide. Then the prosecution rested. It was her turn. Lucia stood and took the stand. She answered the questions calmly, her voice steady even as Victor glared at her from across the room. When asked about her relationship with the Carrington family, she spoke of Isabella, not just as a former employer, but as a best friend. She told them about the letter she'd received in Isabella's handwriting, the journal tucked away in Ethan's playroom, and the fire report the housekeeper had discovered. Her words were clear, deliberate. Not accusation, just truth. Victor's lawyer objected several times, but the judge allowed her testimony. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan stood up from the gallery and walked toward the bench. The judge leaned forward. "Young man, are you here with someone?" "I am," Ethan said, his voice small but steady. "I'm here with Lucia." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Lucian's eyes widened. Nathaniel half rose from his seat. Ethan looked directly at the judge. "Can I say something?" The judge hesitated, then nodded. Briefly. Ethan clutched a crumpled drawing in his hand as he walked forward. "She didn't hurt me," he said, looking at Lucia. "She helped me talk again. She made me feel safe." He held up the drawing. Stick figures of him, Lucia, and Nathaniel all holding hands. "I want to live with her. My mom said I could, in her letter." Lucia felt her breath catch. She hadn't known Ethan had seen that letter. The judge asked the bailiff to bring the letter forward. Nathaniel's lawyer confirmed it matched Isabella's handwriting. Then came the final reveal. The housekeeper stepped forward with a sealed envelope she'd found tucked in one of Isabella's jewelry boxes. A second will. A notarized document naming Lucia as Ethan's legal guardian in the event of Isabella's suspicious death. Victor turned pale. His attorney tried to object, but the judge overruled. "I see no basis for the plaintiff's claims," the judge said. "In fact, what I see is an attempt to remove a woman who's done nothing but protect this child, possibly from the very man who brought her here today." The courtroom was silent. Lucia sat in stunned quiet, unable to speak. The judgment had been swift, but her heart was still catching up. Then Nathaniel stood, slowly approaching her as the judge dismissed the room. "You were never just the nanny, were you?" he asked softly. Lucian looked up, her voice barely a whisper. "I never wanted to replace her." "You didn't," Nathaniel said, "but you brought back a part of her we thought we'd lost, and something more." Before she could answer, Ethan ran into her arms. She held him close, her heart full of trembling relief. But she knew this was only the beginning of a new chapter. Outside the courtroom, the afternoon sun was golden, but the air around Lucia still felt heavy with the aftershock of everything that had been said, everything that had been proven. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and yet all Lucia could hear was the echo of Ethan's voice and Nathaniel's question. "You were never just the nanny, were you?" Nathaniel guided them away from the chaos, his hand gently on Ethan's back, his eyes never leaving Lucia. They sat in the back of the sleek black car that had always felt too luxurious to Lucia. This time it felt like safety. "I didn't know she named me in a will," Lucia murmured, her voice hushed as she stared out the window. "I didn't even think she trusted me that much." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. Isabella didn't trust easily, but with you, she did. I see now why." Lucia didn't respond. Her throat was thick with emotion, with guilt and fear and the weight of what they'd just survived. And yet, underneath it all, was something she hadn't felt in a long time. Oh. That evening, Nathaniel asked Lucia to join him in Isabella's old studio. It hadn't been touched since the fire, but repairs had begun. The broken windows were replaced, the charred floorboards were gone, and standing in the center of it all was an easel with a blank canvas. Lucia stepped inside, her breath catching. "I thought it should be used again," Nathaniel said, his voice low. "But not for her, for us, for what's next." Lucia turned to face him. "You believe me now?" "I believe in you now," he corrected softly. "I was blind for too long, blinded by guilt, by grief. I never saw what was right in front of me." She smiled, her eyes brimming. "I wasn't sure I should stay. I wasn't sure I could let you go." They didn't kiss, not yet. There was still too much unsaid. But something shifted, quietly, beautifully in that moment between them. A beginning wrapped in understanding. Later that night, Lucia tucked Ethan into bed. He had started sleeping without a nightlight now, his drawings no longer filled with shadows, just stars, and tiny hearts, and stick figures with smiles. "I'm glad you stayed," he whispered, eyes heavy. "I'm glad too," she said, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. Then she stepped into the hallway and nearly collided with Nathaniel. He held something in his hands, a small music box. Lucia recognized it instantly. It had once sat on Isabella's nightstand. "I found it in her study," Nathaniel said. "It plays her favorite song." Ethan remembered. Lucia's fingers grazed the lid. She used to play it while painting. "I know," he said. "That's where he got the melody." The silence between them was thick with memory. "I thought I'd never let myself feel again," Nathaniel said quietly. "Not after losing her, but when I saw you with him, with Ethan, I realized something." Lucia turned slowly to face him. "You didn't just give my son his voice back," he whispered. "You gave me mine." Lucia's breath caught. "And now," he continued, voice trembling, "I don't want to lose either of you." She stepped forward, inch by inch. "You don't have to." They stood there, in the quiet glow of the hallway, not needing grand declarations, just truth, just presence. As the clock ticked softly in the background, Nathaniel reached for her hand. It fit perfectly. This wasn't the end of something old. It was the beginning of something real. The sun filtered through soft curtains as Lucia stood by the large bay window of the Carrington estate. The weight of the past few weeks, the accusations, the courtroom battles, the echoes of Isabella's secrets still clung to her like a second skin. But today, for the first time, the air felt light. Victor Carrington had been arrested. Fraud, obstruction of justice. The judge's gavel came down like thunder, silencing years of deceit and greed. Nathaniel had stood beside her in court, his expression unreadable until the verdict was read. That was when he turned to her, the weight of realization in his voice. "You were never just the nanny, were you?" Lucia hadn't answered, not with words at least. Her eyes, brimming with unshed tears, told him everything, about friendship, loyalty, and promises made long ago. Now, standing in the quiet, she was overwhelmed not by fear or loss, but by peace. The Carrington estate no longer felt like a place where ghosts lived. It felt like a place where healing had begun. The door creaked open softly behind her. "You're up early?" Nathaniel said, his voice warm but tentative. Lucia turned. He looked tired. Tired in the way people do when they've fought for something real and almost lost it. But his eyes carried a gentleness she hadn't seen before, a quiet reverence, a softness meant only for her. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "Too many memories in this house." Nathaniel stepped closer, stopping just a breath away. "Lucia, I owe you more than an apology. You came here for Ethan. You stayed. For all of us." Lucia lowered her gaze. "I stayed because I had to. For Isabella, for her son." "And for me?" he asked, voice quieter. Lucia hesitated. At first, no, but now, she met his eyes. Nathaniel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. He didn't open it yet. "Do you remember what Isabella always said about love?" he asked. Lucia smiled faintly. "That it's not the grand gestures, it's the quiet promises." He opened the box. Inside was a delicate silver band, etched with the Carrington family crest, beside a new engraving. "Lucia Isabella." "She saw something in you," Nathaniel said, "and now I do too." Lucia's breath caught. "Nathaniel, Before she could finish, the sound of small feet echoed down the hallway. Ethan burst into the room, dressed in a miniature tuxedo. His grin was wide, missing a front tooth. "You look like a prince," Lucia said, crouching to his level. He beamed. "And you look like a fairy." Nathaniel chuckled. "He's not wrong." Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Only this?" Lucia opened it. It was a picture of the three of them, Lucia, Nathaniel, and Ethan, standing in a garden under a banner that read, "Family." Lucia couldn't speak. She pulled Ethan into a hug, holding him close. "I like when you smile, Lulu," Ethan whispered. Nathaniel stepped beside them, placing a hand on her back. "We still have one more thing to do today." Lucia nodded. Today wasn't just about love. It was about legacy. The garden had been transformed. White roses lining the walkway, soft music playing from hidden speakers, and a new plaque beneath the old oak tree where Isabella used to sit. The Carrington garden, once a place of sorrow, now shimmered with new life. Lucia took Nathaniel's hand. "Are you ready?" he whispered. She looked ahead to the altar, where Ethan now waited, holding a small basket of flower petals. "I've never been more ready," she whispered back. The garden was bathed in golden light as Lucia walked down the aisle, every step echoing with meaning. She wore a flowing ivory dress, simple, elegant, and laced with delicate embroidery that matched the petals Ethan had scattered before her. The soft hum of music wrapped around the guests, but it was the emotion in their eyes that made Lucia's hands tremble slightly. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a resurrection. Ethan stood proudly at the front, looking every bit the young man his mother would have been proud of. He held a small bouquet in his hands, and when Lucia reached him, he beamed up at her. "You ready, Lulu?" he whispered. Lucia nodded, brushing a hand through his hair. "As long as you're with me." He took her hand and led her the final few steps to where Nathaniel waited beneath a canopy of white roses. His eyes never left hers, not when the guests were, not when the music swelled, not even when the breeze stirred the leaves and sent a soft wave of petals across the ground. His gaze held steady, as if anchoring them both to this new chapter they were about to begin. When she reached him, Nathaniel took her hands in his. They didn't speak right away. They didn't need to. Between them lay all the words already spoken, through pain, through silence, through letters and drawings, and a child's voice reborn. The officiant cleared his throat softly, but before he could speak, Nathaniel raised a hand. "Before we begin," he said gently, "I want to say something, not as a billionaire, not as the man everyone sees in headlines, but as someone who once lived in grief and learned how to breathe again because of the woman standing before me." Lucia's eyes shimmered, and a soft murmur of emotion stirred among the guests. Nathaniel continued, "You didn't come here looking for love. You came to fulfill a promise. But in doing that, you didn't just heal my son, you healed me. And I know now, love doesn't always begin with a kiss. Sometimes, it starts with a whispered bedtime story, with a shared tear in a hallway, with a boy saying 'Mama' for the first time in 2 years. Lucia squeezed his hand tightly. "And sometimes," she replied, voice trembling, "it begins with a letter you thought you'd never read, from a friend you thought you'd never lose." Ethan stepped forward, holding up a silver plaque. The guests turned to look, as it was unveiled behind them, anchored to the garden wall beneath the climbing roses. "The Carrington Garden for Healing, in honor of Isabella." Lucia stepped closer to the plaque, running her fingers gently over the engraved name. "She's here," she whispered. Nathaniel nodded, "and she'd be proud." After the vows were exchanged, After Ethan offered them both rings with shaky hands and a shy grin, after the cheers and the music and the gentle hum of joy carried through the garden, the family of three walked together to the bench beneath the tree. Lucia sat with Ethan on one side, Nathaniel on the other. For the first time in years, there was no shadow looming, no secret waiting to be revealed. Only a future blooming in the place where love had once been lost. Ethan leaned against her shoulder. "Can we come back here tomorrow?" "Every day," she whispered, kissing his forehead. Nathaniel wrapped an arm around them both. "This isn't the end." Lucia looked at them, her new family, born not from perfection but from resilience, and smiled. "No, it's just the beginning." A gust of wind stirred the trees, rustling the leaves like a whisper from the past. And somewhere, deep within, Lucia could almost hear Isabella's voice again. "Keep your promises, Lucia. Love never forgets." And she had.